John?
All right,
Yeah.
it's on. Okay, so we've got some viewers. This is Pick Last.
Okay, apparently we're doing
Yeah, it's
this.
awesome. So this is PickLastSports.com, fan perspectives on sports and politics. For this show, we'll be talking about the NBA. And since Saturday morning, you could not talk about the NBA without talking about the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, Donald T. Sterling, and his racist and sexist comments to his girlfriend, V. Stiviano, revealed to TMZ. You really can't make this up. So we have here, of course, Harjeet Singh Gill, also with PickLastSports.com. And as a special guest, we have John DeLeon. By day, John is an attorney specializing in employment law, and by night, John is the biggest Clippers fan that I know. He's such a big fan, he has a basketball signed by both Michael Olowokandi and Yaroslav Korolev in his closet. If you don't know who these two people are, Google search Clippers draft bus.
History will still work on Yaroslav Korolev, I believe.
All right, right on. And Harjeet, would you mind introducing yourself as the other sort of co-writer of Pick Last Sports?
Hey everybody, Harjeet Gill. I write at Pick Last along with Timmy. I am while being raised in Northern California, I am wearing a purple hoodie with a "This Guy Loves the Lakers"
Very nice.
shirt. Diehard Laker fan who still holds it against Stern for the rest of my life that Chris Paul should simply just be playing for the Lakers and everything would be okay.
And John, how did you become a Clippers fan? Because there's always a story behind anybody who is a Clippers fan in LA.
I did not like the Los Angeles Lakers, but I like the city of Los Angeles, so I had no choice. And also, Elton Brand is a great guy. During the formative years of basketball, Elton Brand was an awesome player, but an awesome human being. So I liked watching them, and then the 2005 playoffs, Clipper fan for life.
Nice, nice. And of course, as great players go, with the Clippers, Elton Brand left in free agency. So, great.
Well, not only did he leave in free agency, he left after luring Baron Davis to sign with the Clippers. So,
yeah, that was kind of cool.
But
we'll get into that in a second. So Harjeet, for folks who don't know, for folks who don't know exactly what happened this weekend, can you talk about what went down and why is there this outrage towards the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, Donald T. Sterling?
Sure. So over the weekend, one evening, I was awoken with a flurry of text messages about this leaked tape, which is, so far we have to say allegedly, but most likely is the voice of Donald Sterling, the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, along on the phone recorded conversation with his, I guess, girlfriend, mistress, lover, V. Stiviano, and basically it's him on audio talking about how he does not want her associating publicly with African American folks and with minorities, despite her being mixed race, person of color. It starts with she took a picture, and she did what anyone would do if you saw Magic Johnson on the street. You would take a selfie and put it on Instagram. It's what I would do. It's what you would do. You don't have to be a Laker fan. He's Magic freaking Johnson. He's one of the greatest players to have played basketball. So even being Magic Johnson was not a good enough reason for her to do so, according to Donald Sterling. So it's like a 9-minute long audio tape. He also mentions Matt Kemp as someone he doesn't want her associating with or relating with, which is really just random. I mean, it's like, do you want to take on two of the stars of Los Angeles sports, Matt Kemp, center fielder for the LA Dodgers, and Magic freaking Johnson? Of course, he didn't think that anybody would ever hear this. The NBA elite, the Magic, of course, responded. In the tape, he actually says that he doesn't want her bringing Magic to any Clipper games. I'm not sure if he attends them regularly or if he's ever has any relationship with it. But in response, Magic said, you won't find me at a Clipper game. Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant and LeBron have both chimed in saying he doesn't have a place in the NBA at this point. And even, Mr. I don't talk about politics, I don't get involved in social matters, Michael Jordan has chimed in, is upset about this. So it is a huge issue. And the Clippers, there's a lot of pressure being put on the Clippers players to respond. And so they did so for those who watched the game or at least caught the intro or saw any of the highlights by walking in, dropping their warm-up jerseys in the center, and playing, I believe, with their logos inside out during the pregame yesterday to yesterday's game. So that's kind of the quick version of the backstory. TMZ reported the audio, and it's available on their website for people who want to hear it.
Yeah, it's an incredible listen. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I mean, we knew Donald T. Sterling was a piece of work. I think the other thing I would add to that is just tonight's game, the Miami Heat game where they swept the Bobcats. The Heat players also did the same sort of symbolic gesture of wearing their shirts inside out and then dropping their kind of shirts kind of in the center court as to evoke what the Clippers did that last game.
That might be the only time, by the way, that anyone invokes what the Clippers do historically and in the future.
Cool. And
Sorry, John.
Yeah, on that note...
no, I've been a fan for long enough to know that that's probably true. And I will say that I don't think Donald Sterling cared whether it got out or not, because he's been doing this for the past 30 years at the very least and has gotten away with it.
So John, tell us, who are the Clippers, and why is this episode not at all surprising for Clippers and NBA fans and anybody who works on housing issues in the LA area? Like, why is this totally unsurprising?
Well, Donald Sterling, of course, bought the Clippers in 1981. And I encourage anyone who wants to know more about how hideous a human being Donald Sterling is to read Dave Zirin's book, Bad Sports, and how owners are ruining the games we love. He has a chapter dedicated to the awesome scumbag that Donald T. Sterling is. In his chapter, there are three specific, two instances that he mentioned specifically. One, the slumlords that Donald Sterling owns throughout the Los Angeles area, where he's been sued and settled many lawsuits brought by minorities, old people, widows, where Donald Sterling has evicted them for either the color of their skin or putting potted plants outside just because he doesn't like them, because he's rich and he can do whatever he wants, or at least that's the mentality that he has. He was sued by his general manager, Elgin Baylor. Now, granted, Elgin Baylor didn't have the best track record as a GM, but he didn't have the support of a good owner, so I'm not sure if you can put that on him. And Elgin Baylor had some choice quotes attributed to Donald Sterling, which are far worse than anything on this tape. I mean, at one instance, Elgin Baylor said that Sterling wanted his basketball team to be run like a southern plantation with black workers and a white head coach. And if that's so much more atrocious, analogizing the basketball team to slavery than anything that he said in the tape. He's also known to heckle his own players. He called Al Thornton the most selfish NBA player he's ever seen. He used to heckle Baron Davis during his last year with the Clippers, and his pettiness brought him to trade Baron Davis to the Cavaliers for absolutely nothing. And he even packaged the first-round pick, which ended up to be Kyrie Irving. So I guess there's karma in the sports world. Mm-hmm. And reporters know him for bringing in his whatever 20-something-year-old woman he's dating at the time, or hooker he's paying, into the locker room so that they could admire his players' bodies. I mean, this is a person who really has no sense of morals or accountability to anyone. And the Clippers have sucked their whole history in LA because he's more concerned with a profit than anything else.
So, anything you want to add, Harjeet?
No,
like a bad dude.
I think he kind of covered it. I mean, he is kind of the epitome of what a bad owner looks like when you break it down. It's like combination racist, sexist, you know, controlling egomaniac who doesn't really care about winning and uses the team like a bank ATM. Say what you will about the Steinbrenners and all the other owner families of like big franchises, but teams that pump money back, at least those people are pumping money back into their franchise while they skim money. Donald Sterling just uses it to in a very neoliberal sense, just to pull the money out and let the team kind of fester.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing to note. Like the Clippers have been a profitable like franchise for years, and it's an extremely lucrative franchise now. Worth I think the estimates are close to 600 million. Is that correct?
I think it's more. I think it's in the billions. I mean, the Milwaukee Bucks sold for 550 million. The Los Angeles Clippers have to be worth more than that.
Okay. Well, we can do some research and find this out. Any last thoughts on how bad this dude is, John?
Well, I think that to concentrate, I mean, he's racist, yes, but he's also a terrible, terrible human being. What he's done is not, I mean, yes, he doesn't like minorities, but he feels this sense of entitlement because it's almost, I guess, to use the lawyer term, it's affluenza. You know, that's what he has. He has affluenza. So maybe there's a judge in Texas who would not convict him of anything.
So what strikes me about how obvious, I mean, what strikes me is how obvious Dante Sterling's racism is, and there's much conversation in these media and focused on that. But I think we hear a lot less about how this intersects with sexism and just sort of this classist attitude he has, and I think John really kind of brings that up. How do we see sexism playing out in these tapes and in Dante Sterling's behavior?
Well, obviously from the women that he dates, I mean, and I would use dates in quotation marks. He's very well known in the area to be a womanizer with a young woman. I mean, it's the core of seeing women not as people but as sexual objects. There's a story in Dave Zirin's book again about how he hired a 20-something-year-old model as his assistant GM in San Diego, and had her replace Paul Silas during a road trip one day after he fired. I mean, so for me, that's where the sexism is, not seeing women as human beings.
Thoughts, Harjeet?
I mean, I also see, like, even the way this conversation is shaping up, right? It's getting ugly. She's a gold digger. She set him up. That's being used a lot. To record him to get evidence because of some pending lawsuit. The whole way the narrative is being shaped, even among like decent sports writers, does include a modicum of, well, I mean, she set him up, but that's okay. It's okay that she set him up. It's like, well, she didn't set him up. She recorded him, and just showed us what he really is.
Yeah.
The way on the recordings is very clear that he doesn't believe that she has the right to free association, to doing things like just posting a picture on Instagram without like his permission. I mean, very clearly he sees her as property, much like he sees the players, right? He says he essentially owns them. He has a plantation mindset. So he is the rich white overlord over the women and the black bodies and whoever else he owns. Specifically, though, just the way that he tells her or tries to guilt trip her into, or like make her feel bad about associating with Magic Johnson on the streets of LA or wherever it is, is a real clear example of the way that he believes that women should be treated, or what rights that his girlfriend has. So that's disturbing.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that intersection with his own racism too, and how he treats her as not who she actually is, which is black and Mexican, and like she identifies as such, and like pushes him on that, and it totally makes him uncomfortable that that he can even like acknowledging that he is with someone who is not, who is black and Latino, like just throws him off.
Right.
Yeah. Ooh. So kind of moving onward. everybody has an opinion about how the Clippers players should react, respond, or demonstrate to the Donald T. Sterling comments. Like even before the game, people were calling on the Clippers to boycott the game. The people were calling on everybody had something to say. Writers, Jeff Van Gundy during the game with the sports announcer. Um, you know, what do you all think was the right response? Like, how should the Clippers players respond to this, if there even is a right way to do that?
Well, I personally really hate Mark Jackson, and as an aside, it's only because he said, well,
Mark
I
Jackson,
think
the coach of the Golden State Warriors, right?
you're right. When asked about this, he's like, well, the Clippers shouldn't even show up for today's game. I mean, he didn't say that, but that's what he was intimating right before Game 4. And at Game 5, he's like, no one should go to Staples Center. I mean, yes, there's a proper amount of outrage here, but to punish the team for the views of the owner, I think, is sort of out of line. And I think what the Clippers players decided to do was reasonable. I mean, that's the most they could have done. And calling for boycotts of sponsors and putting economic pressure on Donald Sterling to sell, I think, is sort of the right idea. So ending sponsorships, not buying merchandise. Tickets, I think, yes, the money does go to Donald Sterling, but again, that's punishing the team. And does Chris Paul deserve to be punished? I'm not sure. There's also one owner, I think the owner of the Houston Rockets suggested that all of the Clippers players should become free agents after this season to sort of show Donald Sterling, teach him a lesson, and that no NBA player would sign with the Clippers, which I also think is a little short-sighted, again, as a Clippers fan. But I think the right idea is really get rid of the Clippers logos. I think that for the rest of this season, and maybe while Donald Sterling is the owner, the Clippers should always wear the road uniforms. I think they should be emblazoned with Los Angeles and not the Clippers on the front of their shirts.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Hardeep?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was discussing with my partner Willow the fact that essentially the league and fans are wanting, much like how in society people don't want systems to deal with issues, but want people to somehow deal with the issue. Somehow the onus is on Chris Paul to deal with the fact that Donald Sterling is a bad owner and is a bad human being with awful viewpoints. But really, there's 31 other owners, and they're a consortium. They are a grouping of billionaires, and they're supposed to police themselves. I mean, ultimately, that's where the power lies in this scenario, and saying that Chris Paul should do something or DeAndre, I think they should. Chris Paul should do something as the head of the union for sure. Certainly, as a leader in the union, we're looking to Chris Paul as a union member. I look for union leadership, and we're hoping that Chris Paul steps up to the plate in that role. But as players, it's very limited. I mean, they're involved in this game. They need to play, I think. I do think it would have been interesting to see players step up to boycott, primarily because they lost so much in the last collective bargaining agreement in terms of power. This would have been a key moment to stand up, take some power back before the next negotiations, show that they're willing to take steps that are very serious. We know that the pensions were won once upon a time by threatening not to play the All-Star game, and that's the All-Star game. This is the playoffs. I have a feeling there would have been quick proposals being made and promises to get things done if people would take that risk. But I don't think that it's my position to determine how they should react to what they've learned. I think it's kind of up to them to collectively come to that. I would perform more bold action just generally.
As an aside, as a Clippers fan, I've been trained to look for the dark side of every happy news, and it's normally had a dark side. In 2005, after the Clippers playoff run, Elton Brand gets injured, and then he bolts the next year. Blake Griffin gets drafted number 1. He gets injured that year. We get Chris Paul, but Vinny Del Negro's still our coach. So this year, everything seemed right. There's no injuries. We got the players. We got the coach. So something had to ruin this year for the Los Angeles Clippers.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Got-
Thanks, John, for putting all of this in historical context. I think that's totally right on. I mean, I just think that the I think Harjeet pulls together a really interesting point, and you too, John. That's two things. Just one that like I think it's important that however the Clipper players choose to demonstrate against their employer, that like that's something that like fans and folks like should support, and I feel like. What they did on Sunday was particularly powerful, and yeah, I think that's kind of cool. And I think, if we're just kind of thinking pie in the sky, I could imagine. I mean, what a tremendous move it would be if we weren't just talking about the Clippers boycotting the games, but like if the Warriors like were like, okay, we're gonna boycott too, and like or like the rest of the playoff teams just like we're not gonna play until you deal with this. And deal with this racist in our midst, who are running these teams, So, I don't know. It's kind of interesting to think about. I was told to credit that idea with my partner, Linda, make sure that the world knows that that was her idea. Yeah. Let's come back to the whole fan thing. So let's talk fans again. So what, John, what can or should Clipper fans be doing? Like, how do you be a fan of a franchise whose owner is a racist, sexist slumlord who treats his team like a plantation?
Well, I think with sports teams it's different because you can like personalities on sports teams, right? I like the Clippers because I liked Elton Brand. I thought he was a great guy. I liked Danny Manning before him. I like Blake Griffin. I think he works hard. I like Chris Paul. I think he's aggressive. He might not be the greatest person in the world, but I like that competitive attitude. And
Cardinals, let's be real.
He shouldn't be a Clipper. He should be a Laker. And I thank David Stern for that every day of my life. So I think you can separate sort of the two. I mean, just because you eat at Papa John's doesn't mean you subscribe to the view that Obamacare is evil. Or just because you shop at Walmart doesn't mean you think that we should all be in charter schools. Or just because you eat any sort of food doesn't mean that you like agribusiness, which receives so much in subsidies. I think that there are plenty of billionaires that are evil. I mean, not separating this from money, but I think there are plenty of owners of big corporations that are evil that, by necessity or because of other outside factors, we consume their products. And I think the sports is different because there are players within those organizations that we like to cheer for. I was a Dodger fan for a long time, and then management sold it to Fox. Just because I continued to cheer for the Dodgers doesn't mean that I liked everything that Fox was doing. I would have boycotted Fox for the atrocities that were Star Wars episodes 1 through 3, which, while not on the same level as Donald T. Sterling, Jar Jar Binks is a little close. Come on.
I will say that the Phantom Menace wasn't as bad as people think it is.
And I would say that the everybody who thinks that the first 3 episodes is canon should really rewatch them again. They're really not as good as people think.
Well, number 3 was okay. Come on. Except the first part of number 3 was the very end. No, come on.
3 was good. Okay.
3 was good.
It was good.
2 was awful. 2 was awful.
But John, I asked you this question, John, because you've been on this boycotting the Clips tip for a while, and not just because of this most recent racist incident, but I wanted to ask this question directly to you too, John. Like, what's been your line? Like, how have you navigated being a Clippers fan while knowing what you know about the owner?
Well, ever since I found out that Donald T. Sterling was a terrible human being, I've done my best to ensure that I cheer for the Clippers, but I don't provide any monetary support to Mr. Sterling. Can I call him Mr. Tokowitz? It feels weird calling him Sterling. And for those of you who don't know, Donald Tokowitz changed his name to Sterling.
Because it sounded more awesome. That's basically it, right?
Right. And so, Mr. Tokowitz, I do not buy any merchandise from the Clippers. I do not buy any Clippers merchandise whatsoever. I purchased the closest thing to Clippers merchandise I've purchased is a Chris Paul signed basketball. That the money went to Chris Paul, not to Mr. Tokowitz. I don't buy Clippers games tickets. I don't watch games in Staples Center. I would watch the Clippers on the road, and I have watched the Clippers in Golden State. Um, and I and I drop cable, so I don't the Clippers are on Prime Ticket. I don't support them when they're on Prime Ticket. I watch their nationally televised games on ABC, ESPN, and TNT, but not on their regional local network.
Hmm. Sounds like we've got the sketch for a brilliant sort of call to action for Clippers fans who give a crap about this.
Although I do think people should show up to game. I mean, it would suck for the Clippers players to play in an empty Staples Center. So I'm not sure that I would advocate that. I mean, the players have worked very hard this whole season to get to where they're at. They've sacrificed so much, and the prime the lifespan of a player in the NBA is so short these days. So to have Blake Griffin and Chris Paul waste these best years of their life due to the actions of their owner, I think is unfair to them.
Yeah. And Hito Turkoglu too, especially Hito.
And Danny Granger, who we should have drafted instead of Yaroslav Korolev, but we didn't.
Oh, it hurts.
Don't get me started on that.
Yeah, it hurts. So, so Harjeet, so there's this video. So this is a question for you both, actually, but specifically to Harjeet. So there's this video response posted by Jay Smooth, who comments on how it's interesting that people saying racist things gets way more attention than people doing racist things. Like, why do you think that is, and what does that say about racism and oppression in the U.S.? Like, just why? Like, why are we caring so much about like what Donald T. Sterling is saying right now versus what he's been doing as Clippers owner for years?
I mean, it's a lot easier to ignore housing discrimination and, you know, his mind and general way of being. But when you hear something, there's this individualization, right? It's the structural versus individual racism thing. It's really offensive to hear those words come out of his mouth. When you hear he was messing with, you know, evicting people, etc., like, oh, how awful. When you hear it out of his mouth, it just sounds so bad, and those words carry so much weight that I think they shocked people, because people today don't. I mean, I grew up in a place where they do speak that way, but generally speaking, people don't walk around talking like that, and it's a bit of a relic from a previous time. So that kind of individual, like, you know, personal slave plantation kind of racism has given way to more the structural racism, which has always been there, but in terms of the primary way in which people relate to racism in the U.S., right? Whether it's the, you know, housing discrimination or the general economic structure or the prison industrial complex, these are places where structural racism is very much the law of the land, and they're built in and taught to us from an early age with stereotypes, etc., and to set up that foundation. We're taught, you know, like, we're not a racist society. Some people do things that are bad and we punish them for it, or, you know, this happens to people sometimes because of who the situations they're in. We don't explore those issues as they relate to oppression, class, race, etc. Things like the prison industrial complex, for example. But hearing those words and that kind of like open, devout racism is just something that people are taught is wrong, and so hearing it is offensive. Where we're not taught it's wrong that, you know, a large number of young men of color end up in prison. We're taught that they're wrong, not that it's a problem and that it's wrong. So,
yeah.
I also think that to some extent there's a problem in the media as well. I think this episode of Donald T. Sterling racism is being played so much more on ESPN and news outlets because it combines the racist aspect with sex, and there's a tape on TMZ. I mean, it's all of these things which you can spend hours talking about, which ESPN has. Whereas talking about housing discrimination suits and what he's done to tenants to kick them out, that's not as sexy, and you're not going to get viewers that way. So there's a big problem with the media not covering. I think there would be similar outrage from regular folks if the media covered those things as much as they covered the sensational stories.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's definitely the case, and it's just interesting the way that uh, the Donald T. Sterling's like racism, like how it gets played out in the media too, because like the focus is on his, and even in the past in the housing discrimination suits, like it falls within sort of like a historical sort of trend of his kind of the racism that he directs towards blacks and Latinos and poor people when he excludes them from being able to rent in his buildings. And I would say too, I think it would just one thing I just want to toss in there too, especially since we've got a Google Hangout with like 3 Asian dudes, is just how he's deployed like kind of Asianness and Asian people as like this model minority wedge too. And so like that's like it was played up in his housing discrimination suits. He wouldn't rent to black and Latino folks, but he would rent to white folks and Korean folks. And that is like that's terrible stuff. Yeah. So I just, but I think just kind of thinking about this and like the what it all means for kind of race and racism in the U.S. I think there's this interesting like class aspect to it too, and we kind of see this with when we hear stories of like Henry Louis Gates Jr. and other kind of black intellectuals and black athletes in particular who get profiled and get policed in a way that's like entirely about their race. And it's just interesting how it's played out because Matt Kemp and like Magic Johnson are named, like they are specifically named as black people that Donald T. Sterling does not want to associate with. And I think it touched a pretty raw nerve in the way that it just reminds not just society but like reminds black people that this stuff is still real, and it doesn't matter if you've reached the sort of upper echelons of like business or you've become like a member of the black sort of African American elite class in the U.S. that you can at any moment still be like racialized in that way.
It would have been interesting if President Obama was her friend on Instagram to see if Donald Sterling would have been like, don't associate with that man either.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because you can kind of sense with the swiftness of the response, not just because Magic was named specifically, but like from Michael Jordan and LeBron, like it kind of takes a real it takes the legs out from this idea that like black athletes through working hard and investing strategy and through investing smartly and investing in their brand can transcend being like physical athletes into business people, into owners of capital, into owners themselves like Michael Jordan, or like just owners of capital, and I guess in the case of the NBA, the means of production, which is the billions you need to own a team.
Although, and I don't want to be a blame the victim person here, but I do think that Michael Jordan, his sense of being apolitical, as Harjit was talking about, sort of is what brought this situation on. I think if he had a personality more like Muhammad Ali, where he stood up for what he believed in, things wouldn't get like this. I'm reminded of Tiger Woods playing in Augusta when they wouldn't admit women, where it would have been so easy for him to say, no, you know what, segregation is not okay.
Yeah.
And sort of the move of professional athletes away from the political arena and sort of, I'm just playing the game and I'm going to get the sponsorships and I'm not going to rattle the cage. I think that's also something which should be highlighted by this, because some of these things ring hollow because they haven't been as engaged as other athletes would have been or were.
Yeah. So this kind of leads me to the next question, and maybe both of you can kind of take things in turn. Starting with Harjit, like what do you think should be the NBA's response, and what do you think will actually be the NBA's response?
Oh gosh, I am actually quite excited to see how Adam Silver handles this. This will be the moment where he gets to decide where if he's just going to continue the David Stern path, or if he's going to stand up for something in the world. Um, I think that what should happen is one thing I learned today actually is that the NBA doesn't enjoy the same kind of antitrust exemption that other leagues do. From if I understand this correctly.
Only
Um,
baseball has the antitrust exemption.
okay, so kicking out an owner is a lot more difficult because they can threaten that, and that gets into kind of it disrupts the holy grail that is this charade that is like the NBA, right? Like, um, so what would be ideal is that they just somehow force Donald Stern to leave. I mean, the other 31 get together and say you're bad for business. Like, there's a bunch of us who believe the same thing, but you were the one who's stupid enough to say it and get recorded. You're out. Um, that's what I wish would happen. What's going to happen is I think he's going to get suspended for a year um, from all basketball opportunities, and then get to come back in a year and and resume. I don't see what more really can be done. There's a
Mhm.
lot of being put on the players. On the one hand, this stuff has been going on forever. I mean, Elgin Baylor talks about it. Players were aware of this
Yeah.
behavior,
And reporters too.
and
Yeah.
reporters and people have chosen to sign on and play for it. So um, it's as if so it's complicated that way, right? Like I don't want to put it on the players, as I said earlier, but I mean they there are 31 other teams in the NBA, and Chris Paul could have gone somewhere else.
Hmm.
I mean he could have just switched jerseys within the Staples Center if he wanted, made all of our lives a lot better. Uh, he chose not to. He signed that. He re-signed, and you
David
know
Stern chose not to first.
he did. We'll never forgive him. Um, so that's what I think will happen is that there'll be a simple 1 year suspension or something. We'll get to find out tomorrow, though, which is
Yeah.
nice.
What do you think, John? What should be the NBA's response? What do you think will be the NBA's response?
I think the NBA is going to suspend him indefinitely, and I think they're going to reach out to sponsors of the Clippers and apply economic pressure to force Donald Sterling to sell. And I think it's going to be effective. If the Shumash Casino, I know Virgin Atlantic, I know CarMax has gone out, State Farm. I mean, if there are no sponsors, the cash will dry up, and he will be forced either to sell or to keep losing money every year until people forget, and I'm not sure that people are going to forget. I think that that's sort of the coward's way out because they're going to achieve the result, but they're not going to do it through force. If they were to vote to kick him out, there would be a lawsuit, there would be an impending battle. I think it's a fight worth fighting, but it's not my money to spend. But I think he's eventually going to be forced either to sell um, or to give it to his wife, which I don't think the players would be happy with that. I mean, another option would be to change the collective bargaining agreement with the players, but I don't think owners would do that because the players see how financially well they're doing. So who knows?
Yeah. So last question. So since we got to wrap up, so back to basketball, the game. So the Clippers were pretty clearly outplayed by the Warriors in Game 4. Like Steph Curry was dropping threes from all over the court. It was nuts, and it was pretty clear to me watching the game that the Clippers and Doc Rivers, like their hearts were not in it. What do you think is going to happen in Game 5 and for the series? Starting with you, Harjeet.
I mean, I think it'll probably go 7, and the Warriors will win this. I think they're just. It is interesting. It does feel like the whole country is rooting for the Warriors at this point. Um, Not that I believe that fans have that much to do with how the game is played, but I do wonder how much this affects those guys out there on the court. I mean, it's got to be hard to know that that's all anybody wants to talk to you about, and that there's this huge thing going on, related to your employer and where you play, and it's a constant news story. And we'll see tomorrow. I mean, the Warriors came out yesterday shooting from the first quarter, playing that Warrior basketball, with just threes all over the place. And so I mean, I imagine it'll go 7, and the Warriors should be able to pull it out. They may even win it in 6. If they win tomorrow, I think it could end out in 6. So.
Mm-hmm. What about you, John? What do you think?
I've seen this play out every season as a Clippers fan. The Warriors will win in 6, and the Clippers will lose the next 2 games by more than 10 points each.
Wow.
There's absolutely no hope. Go Kings, go!
I don't know. The Kings just pushed it to 7 tonight, so that's pretty awesome.
That's gonna be LA's revenge on the Bay Area.
Yeah, yeah. That's how.
You can have it.
Yeah, you can
I'll take it. I'll take the Kings.
And we'll take the Kings. All right. Well, if since nobody asked me, I'm going to share that. I think I have no idea who's going to win this next game, but if the Clippers can pull it off, like they'll win the series. Whoever wins the next game, I think is going to seal the deal.
You're too hopeful.
I am, but that's I'm that class of Clippers fan too. So
I don't think they. I didn't think they existed.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. So so that's kind of it. Thanks, John and Harjeet also. This was PickLastSports.com, fans' perspectives on sports and politics. Our blog, podcasts, and videos are all about getting sports fans to talk politics, and my iPad just dropped, and to talk about how sports and politics intersect. Check us out. Follow us on Facebook at PickLast and at PickLastSports.com. And thanks for watching and listening. I'm going to sign us off now.